A girl in a 4 times mended dress walks into a room full of powerful men. They have already decided she is nothing. No name, no fortune. A father drowning in debt. They have spent the whole morning behind a closed door, weighing her life like a coin they intend to spend. And they did not think she could hear them. But these old walls carry everything. She heard every word, and now she stands in the center of their certainty, alone, in the gray light of dawn, with her chin lifted and her grandmother's brass button warm in her pocket. She did not come to beg. She did not come to be saved. She came to speak. Because somewhere in this cold house, hidden inside a servant's plain gray coat, is a secret that is about to break wide open, and nothing in these stone halls will ever be the same again. There was an old saying in the high country, stitched into the linen of every bridal chest, carved above the doorways of the oldest houses. A name shows only what a person wants you to see. Their hands show what they are. Marin had grown up hearing it. Her grandmother had pressed a small brass button into her palm on the last morning of that good woman's life. Dull, plain, unremarkable. And she had whispered in a voice already going soft at the edges, "Keep this. When you find the one whose hands are honest, give it back to him." Marin had kept the button in the pocket of every dress she had owned since she was 9 years old. She was 22 now. The dress was thin at the seams. The pocket had been re-sewn 4 times. But the button remained. She had no name worth speaking, no money worth counting. According to the people who decided such things, she had no business being sent to the estate at all, but her father had debts, and the great houses had a custom that required a certain number of young women each season, so Marin was folded into a carriage with 2 prettier, louder, wealthier stepsisters, and sent down the long road to the place they called Thornwood. She did not know the quiet man who would help her down from that carriage, the one with road dust on his collar, and careful, unhurried hands. She did not know that he was the whole reason she had been sent for at all. Thornwood rose out of the low hills like a second thought made permanent. The stone was old and dark. The towers leaned against the sky at odd, uneven angles. The gardens had gone wild in a way that felt chosen, not neglected. Marin loved it at once. She loved it the way a person recognizes something they had no right to expect. The carriage yard was full when they arrived. Other families spilling out into the gravel, daughters in layered silk, mothers narrating their daughters' best qualities in voices meant to carry. Marin stepped down last. The carriage rocked beneath her. Her foot slipped on the iron step, and for one airless second, the gravel rose up to meet her. A hand caught her elbow. Steady, warm, sure. It belonged to a man in the plain gray clothes of the household staff, dark hair, broad shoulders, though he wore them quietly, as if he had decided long ago not to take up more room than he needed. There was a kind of authority in the set of his jaw, the sort he seemed to be holding deliberately still. His eyes were the gray of the estate's own stone, and they were paying attention. "Careful," he said. That was all. "Thank you." Marin steadied herself, smoothed the front of her second-best dress, looked for her stepsisters, who were already halfway across the yard and had not noticed her nearly fall. When she turned back, the man in gray was already moving away. He gathered bags from the carriage roof with the easy efficiency of someone who had done real work for years. He did not look back at her. Not once. But something in the line of his shoulders made her feel, without reason, that the turn of her head had been noticed all the same. He had not expected the falling. Aldous had stood in that yard since first light, watching family after family arrive, and he had grown very good at predicting people before they spoke. The mothers who performed warmth, the daughters who performed everything else. And then the carriage had rocked, and the small one in the worn dress had nearly gone down, and his hand had moved before his mind had finished the thought. Up close, she smelled of nothing he could name at first. Then he had it. Cedar, faint, from the chest her clothes had traveled in, and underneath, something green and clean, like rain that had not fallen yet. She had thanked him as though he were a person, not staff, not furniture, a person. It was such a small thing. It should not have stayed with him as he carried the bags inside. The custom was an old one. 7 days at the estate, shared meals, long walks, quiet evenings in the great parlor, while somewhere behind a screen, the heir was said to be watching, choosing. In theory, character revealed itself in the ordinary. In practice, it had become a kind of pageant. Young women performing their best selves for a man they had never met, and a powerful man confirming what he had already decided. Maren knew she would not win it. She knew it the way she knew the color of her own hands. She was here because the number had to be met, because her father needed his debts forgiven, because she was the spare daughter who could be sent away without anyone minding the loss. She intended to spend 7 days reading in whatever quiet corner they would let her reach, eating enough, keeping her dignity, going home. What she had not planned for was that the library would already be occupied. He was shelving books when she found it on the first morning. The room was enormous, 3 levels of it, ringed with amber lamplight, thick with the smell of old paper and wood smoke and something faintly sweet beneath. It was also, at that hour, empty of everyone who mattered. He worked from a rolling ladder along the far wall, and he read the spines as he went, she noticed, not just replacing them, but reading them, as if the books were old acquaintances he was glad to see again. I assumed the staff would be finished in here by now, she said, not unkindly. She set her own small borrowed book on the nearest table. He looked down from the ladder. The same gray eyes. The man from the carriage yard. I could come back, he said. No, don't. The words came faster than she meant them to. I only meant I didn't expect anyone. She sat. Something about the room made conversation feel natural, not required, just possible. I'm Maren. He came down the ladder in slow, unhurried stages. Reeve, are you assigned to the library? Today. He pulled a cloth from his belt and ran it along the shelf he had just filled. You're one of the candidates. Technically, she opened her book but did not read a word of it. My stepsisters are the real candidates. I'm administrative ballast. They needed a 5th name. I own a dress and I can hold a fork the right way around. It was enough. The ghost of something moved across his face, not quite a smile, the memory of one. Administrative ballast, he repeated, and there it was again, that smell of cedar and green rain, closer now in the still air of the room. It was an odd thing, what he asked her next. He asked it the way a man asks a question he actually wants the answer to. The heir is said to be looking for something specific. What do you think he wants? Marin looked up. It was a strange question for a servant. She turned it over and decided to answer it honestly anyway. Honestly, I think he probably doesn't know yet. She turned a page she had not read. He's only ever met people at their most arranged. Court manners, best angles. That tells you nothing about a person. No, Reeve said quietly. It doesn't. And then the words were out of her before she had decided to say them. A name shows only what a person wants you to see. She caught herself, felt the warmth climb her neck. Sorry, old saying. He had gone very still on the ladder. Finish it, he said. She looked at him. Their hands show what they are. He did not look down at his own hands. He looked at her, with an expression she could not quite name. Focused, intent, and something underneath it she had no word for yet. That's a good one, he said. My grandmother's. Marin's fingers found the small brass button in her pocket, the way they always did. She was wiser than anyone who was ever impressed by her. Voices came through the corridor then, her stepsisters, sharp and carrying. The morning's quiet broke like a held breath let go. Marin stood, tucked the book under her arm. She reached the door and stopped. Same time tomorrow? She asked. She was not sure why she asked it. He was already back on the ladder, his honest hands resting on a worn leather spine. I expect I'll be here, he said. And as she walked out into the noise of the great house, the man on the ladder watched the empty doorway long after she was gone. Because in 8 years of being watched, performed for, and managed, no one had ever looked at what he might be instead of what he had. The evening gatherings were held in the long parlor. The room was made for it. High windows going blue with dusk, candles in tall iron stands, a fire that threw its light across faces and taught them all how to glow. The candidates arranged themselves like flowers in a vase someone else had chosen, and somewhere behind a carved screen at the far end of the room, the heir was said to be watching, choosing. Marin knew the truth of that screen. She did not know it yet, but she felt the wrongness of it. The way a room can hold a lie and pretend it is furniture. The real heir was not behind the screen. He was moving along the edge of the room in plain gray clothes, a pitcher of wine in his hands, refilling cups for people who looked straight through him. Aldous had asked for this. It had not been an easy thing to arrange. His own steward had argued against it. The older voices of his house had not been told, because the older voices would have forbidden it outright. But he had sat through these weeks before. He had watched women perform themselves beautifully for a man they had never met, and he had learned nothing real about a single one of them. So this season, he had come at it from the other direction. He wanted the ordinary. He wanted to see what people were when they believed no one of consequence was watching at all. What he had learned in 3 days was this. Sabra, the eldest of the 2 stepsisters, spoke to the household staff the way a person speaks to a closed door. Around it. Past it. Never to it. Unless she wanted something. Then her voice became a precise and lovely instrument, aimed with care, and put away the moment it had done its work. Lynette, the younger one, cried once in a corridor when she thought a remark had gone against her, and then she had walked into the parlor a moment later, radiant and unbroken, as if the tears had been a costume she could step out of at will. He noted the strength of it. He also noted that it was a performance. And Maren spent her mornings in the library and her evenings in the least visible chair the parlor had to offer. She watched the room with a quality of attention he recognized, because it was the same attention he had spent his whole life learning. The attention of someone who had figured out, long ago, that the edges of a room are where the real things happen. For Maren, the days had a shape. The shape of survival. She knew exactly what she was here for, and exactly what she was not. And there was a strange freedom in that knowledge. The freedom of a person who has nothing left to lose by being herself. But the stakes were not nothing. She let herself remember that each night before sleep took her. If she failed here, and her stepsisters failed too, her father's debts would not be forgiven. The house she had grown up in, with its re-sewn curtains and its leaning gate, would pass into other hands. She did not love her father. He had never given her much to love, but the house had her grandmother in its walls, the smell of her in the linen chest, the worn place on the stair where the old woman used to sit. That Maren would have done a great deal to keep. So she stayed quiet. She kept her dignity folded close, and she waited for the 7 days to end. On the 4th evening, the room turned on her. It happened the way these things always happen, lightly, almost pleasantly. Sabra had positioned herself near the fireplace, in the angle the staff gossip had confirmed was her practiced best. The firelight loved her there, and she knew it. She spoke to Lynette, but she spoke at a volume that was meant to travel. "It's almost embarrassing, truly," Sabra said. "Father must have lost more than any of us knew, to have had to bring her along." Lynette said nothing. She was not cruel, exactly. She was simply Sabra's creature in most things. She has no name, no fortune. She cannot even manage a fashionable illness to excuse that posture. Sabra sipped her wine with the serenity of a woman who had decided that cruelty was only another word for honesty. "I suppose we should be grateful she stays quiet. The air will never once look in her direction. And at least this way she won't embarrass us by trying." The words crossed the room. They were meant to. Maren did not look up. From her corner, with the small borrowed book open on her knee, she turned a page she had not finished reading. But something in her jaw moved. A small, controlled tightening. The kind a person makes when they are choosing, very deliberately, not to let a thing land where it was thrown. She decided the words could not reach her. She decided it the way another woman might lift a shield. And that decision, that quiet, invisible act of will, was not nothing. It was, in fact, everything. He saw it. Aldous stood near the wine table with the pitcher going warm in his hands, and he watched the small muscle work along the line of her jaw. He had spent years in rooms where people fought with words polished to a shine. He knew the difference between a person who had no answer and a person who had chosen not to give one. Maren had an answer. He could see it sitting behind her teeth, sharp and ready. And she was choosing, at some cost to herself, to keep it there. Something in his chest pulled tight at the sight of it. It was not pity. Pity would have been easy. Pity he understood. This was closer to recognition. The strange ache of seeing, in a stranger, A thing you had always believed only you carried. He set the pitcher down. He crossed the room without hurry. He had learned, in years of moving through grand spaces, how to make himself invisible, how to be the hand that fills the cup and never the face anyone remembers. He used all of it now. He refilled the wine on the table nearest her corner, slow, unremarkable. And as he straightened, he set down a small dish beside her chair. Honey figs. The same ones she had taken twice at supper, both nights, when she thought no one was counting. She looked at the dish. Then she looked up at him. Eavesdropping, she murmured, is an occupational hazard, I suppose. Her voice was low, pitched only for him. The walls in these old houses carry everything. Then they'll already know, she said, that I don't need pity figs. There was steel in it, but there was something tired underneath the steel too, and he heard them both. They're not pity, he said. He did not smile. He kept his voice plain and even, the voice of a man simply stating a fact about the world. You had two at supper, both nights. I noticed. A pause. There's a difference. For a moment, Marin did not move. The fire popped somewhere behind her. Sabra's laughter rose and fell across the room, already turned to some other target, already forgetting her. But this man in gray had not forgotten her. He had noticed the figs. He had noticed which chair she chose, and how she sat in it, and that she had taken the sweet thing twice when she thought the counting did not matter. No one had noticed Marin in a very long time. Her grandmother had been the last, and her grandmother was 4 years gone, and lived now only in a linen chest and a worn stair and a small brass button warming in a threadbare pocket. To be noticed, it undid something in her that the cruelty never could. The cruelty she had armor for. She had spent years forging it. But this plain, quiet attention from a man who had nothing to gain by giving it. For this, she had no armor at all. She picked up a fig. Her jaw, which had been so carefully clenched, came loose at last. She ate it slowly. The honey was dark, and the fruit gave under her teeth, and for one moment the whole bitter room receded to a comfortable distance. "Thank you," she said. And this time the words were not a defense. They were only true. "Reeve." He inclined his head a fraction, cloth still in his hand. Domestic and impersonal to anyone watching from across the room, but he did not move away as quickly as he had in the carriage yard. He let himself stay one heartbeat longer than the work required. And in that single extra heartbeat, the air between them changed, the way the air changes before weather. Some pressure neither of them named, some current that had not been there a moment before, and would not leave now that it had come. She smelled the wood smoke on his sleeve, and under it, something warmer, something that was only him. He walked away before either of them could acknowledge it. He had to. Across the room, his steward, Hollis, caught his eye from a doorway. A small tilt of the head that meant the screen was being asked about, that someone had inquired after the air, that the performance at the far end of the room required tending. Aldous went to tend it, but his hands, when he set down the empty pitcher in the corridor outside, were not quite steady. He flexed them once, looked at them. Honest hands, she had called the kind she was waiting for. He wondered, for the first time in his life, whether his were. Behind him, in the parlor, Marin sat with the empty fig dish in her lap. She did not finish her book that night. She watched the gray figure move through the bright room, filling cups, lifting trays, bowing his head to people who would never remember his face. And she thought, there is something wrong about him. Not bad, not dangerous, wrong. The way a single true note is wrong in a room full of pretty, practiced ones. He moved like a man who was used to being obeyed and had decided, for some reason of his own, to serve instead. He asked questions like a man who already knew the shape of every room he entered. He had noticed the figs. She turned the brass button over and over in her pocket, the way her grandmother used to turn it by the fire, and some quiet, stubborn part of her, the part that had survived every cold supper and every cruelty disguised as honesty, leaned toward him in the dark, just slightly, just enough to be dangerous. Tomorrow, she told herself, she would go to the library again, only to read. Only that. She almost believed it. On the fifth morning, the house broke something. Not on purpose, the way houses do. It happened in the corridor outside the dining room, where the morning trays came through, and where the doors had been left open, so that 7 families could hear everything that followed. A crash. Spectacular. Total. The sound of a whole tray of serving dishes meeting the stone floor all at once. And then the worst sound. The silence after. The girl who had dropped it was barely more than a child. 16, if that. Tamsin, the staff called her. She had thin wrists and a cap that never sat quite straight, and now she stood frozen in the wreckage with the particular white-faced horror of a person who does not have the means to replace what she has just destroyed. Broken crockery fanned out around her feet. Spilled food. A spreading stain. Pieces too small to ever fit together again. And in the dining room, behind those open doors, no one moved. Marin heard it from her place at the long table. She heard the crash. She heard the silence. She looked up, and she saw the faces around her arrange themselves. Sabra's face became the face of a woman who was very much not involved. Lynette studied her plate. One of the mothers murmured something about the carelessness of country staff, and another laughed softly into her cup. The steward appeared in the doorway and then stopped. Discipline was his domain, but there were guests, and so he hovered, caught, doing nothing. Marin was on her feet before she had decided to stand. She was in the corridor before anyone could have stopped her. She knelt down in the wreckage in her second-best dress on the cold stone floor, and she began to gather the broken pieces to one side with a calm, sure efficiency that turned the disaster into something a person could survive. "Don't cut yourself on the edges," she said. Her voice was low, practical, warm in equal measure. "Let me take the big pieces. You get the cloth." Tamsin stared at her. They'll take it from my wages." "I don't think they will," Marin said. She stacked. She sorted. She found a fallen napkin and pressed it to the spreading stain. "And if they try, that's a problem we will solve then. Not now. Right now, we just clean the floor." She did not look up at the open doors. She did not check to see who was watching. That was the thing he noticed first. Aldous stood at the edge of the dining room, in the same gray clothes, with a tray balanced in his own hands, and he watched a young woman kneel on a stone floor and clean up a mess that was not hers. For a girl she had never met, in front of every person whose good opinion was supposed to decide her future. There was no performance in it. That was what struck him, low and hard, somewhere beneath the breastbone. No glance toward the audience, no careful arrangement of her face into kindness, no awareness anywhere in the line of her body that she was being seen. There was only a girl on the ground who had decided that this was the thing that needed doing, and so she was doing it. He had been the heir of his house since he was very young. He had spent his whole life among people who were kind when kindness was useful, and forgot how, the moment it was not. He could count on a single hand the number of times he had seen the real thing, unrehearsed, unrewarded, given freely to someone who could do nothing for the giver in return. He was watching it now, and he understood, all at once, that the test he had designed was the wrong test. He had built these 7 days to watch how people behaved toward him, even the disguised him. He should have been watching how they behaved, when they were certain no one worth impressing was watching at all. Marin got the worst of it cleared. Tamsin had stopped shaking. The two of them worked in a rhythm now, the older girl steadying the younger without ever once making her feel small for needing it. "What's your name?" Marin asked. "Tamsin." "I'm Marin. Can you carry that stack to the kitchen without anything sliding?" A small pause. A smile, quick and real. "Good. I'll bring the cloth." And it was only then, rising to her feet, that she saw him. He was standing in the doorway with a tray in his hands. Reeve. He was looking at her with an expression she did not entirely understand. It was not surprise. It was something steadier than that, something that had settled. "You missed a piece," he said quietly. "Left side." She looked, found it, a small white shard against the gray stone. She picked it up. "Thank you." Then she met his eyes with that directness of hers, the one that never seemed to learn caution. Did anyone else come out? A beat. "No," he said. She took that in. She did not say anything about it. She simply nodded, once. And that silence of hers was its own kind of answer. Then she carried the cloth to the kitchen and came back and finished her breakfast. As though she had not, in the space of 3 minutes on a cold floor, shown him the whole shape of who she was. That afternoon, he broke his own rules. He found her in the wild part of the gardens, the far section where the lavender had outgrown its beds long ago, and the gravel paths were more rumor than fact. The kind of place a person went when they did not want to be found. She was sitting on a flat gray stone with her knees drawn up, and she had the brass button out of her pocket, turning it over and over in her fingers, the way she did when she was thinking. He had seen her do it twice before. He had begun, without meaning to learn her small, private habits. He sat down on the stone beside her, without asking, which was not a servant's behavior, and they both knew it. The lavender moved in a low wind. The air was thick with it, that dusty purple sweetness, and underneath it the green smell of crushed stems where her shoes had pressed. For a while, neither of them spoke. "You're not actually a servant," she said. It was not a question. "No." She kept turning the button. The afternoon light caught the dull brass and made it almost warm. "Are you one of his men, then?" "Watching for him. Reporting back." He had prepared answers for this, several of them. He had been preparing them for days. He used none. Something like that, he said. And then, because she deserved more than that, and he could not yet give her all of it. I notice things. For him, it's most of what I'm good for. It was not a lie. It was only not the whole truth. And he felt the weight of the difference, even as he said it. She studied him a long moment. She had a way of looking at a person that did not feel like being examined. It felt like being read by someone who already liked the book. "Why this morning?" she asked. "You came and found me. Why?" He thought about how to answer that. "Because of what you did in the corridor." That was nothing. She frowned, genuinely puzzled. It was crockery. Someone had to. No one else thought someone had to. Then no one else was paying attention. She turned the button over. A broken thing on the floor is just a thing that needs picking up. It doesn't become less broken because important people are watching. It doesn't become more broken because they're not. She said it simply. She had no idea what she was doing to him. He looked at the button in her hands. "Will you tell me about that?" he asked. "You hold it like it matters." For a moment he thought she would refuse. A shadow crossed her face. The button stilled. Then she let out a slow breath. And she told him. She told him about her grandmother, the only person in that cold house who had ever looked at her and seen something worth keeping. She told him about the linen chest and the worn place on the stair and the smell of cedar that still lived in the old woman's dresses. She told him about the last morning, the button pressed into her palm, the soft, fading voice. "Keep this. When you find the one whose hands are honest, give it back to him." "I thought it was a story," Marin said. "A romantic story," she told a lonely child to make her feel less alone. She closed her fingers over the brass. I didn't understand for years that she meant it as an instruction. Something moved in him as she spoke. He had asked her a question, and she had given him her grandmother. That was not how the people of his world answered questions. In his world, every answer was a move in a longer game. Every confidence was a coin spent to buy something later. She had spent nothing. She had simply told him. And in the telling, she had handed him the most fragile thing she owned, with no apparent fear that he would break it. He felt, sitting on that stone, a loneliness in himself he had not known the size of until this moment, when something began, very slightly, to fill it. "What about you?" she said. "Where do you actually come from? You don't sound like the staff here. You don't sound like anyone here, really." He was quiet. "Somewhere with a great deal of stone," he said at last, "and a great many people who wanted things from the people in charge of it. I learned to listen at the edges of rooms. Same as you, I think." She tilted her head, considering him. "You're sad," she said, not unkindly, just true. Underneath all that quiet, you're one of the loneliest people I've ever sat next to. It landed like a hand pressed flat against his chest. No one had ever said it to him. A great many people had wanted things from him. Not one had ever simply looked at him and named what they saw. "Yes," he said. The single word cost him more than she could know. She did not reach for him. She did not soften it with comfort. She just let the truth sit between them in the lavender air, the way you let a wounded thing rest without crowding it. And somehow, that was the kindest thing she could have done. They sat there until the light began to go long and gold. He learned the sound of her laugh, finally, when she described her stepsister's theories about the air. He learned that she read 3 things at once and lost all of them. He learned that she was funnier than she let the world see, because the world had never given her a safe place to be funny. And she learned that this strange, quiet man listened to her as if she were the only thing in the world worth listening to. No one had ever done that either. The space between them on the stone had grown smaller without either of them deciding it should. His sleeve nearly touched her arm. She could smell the wood smoke and the warm, particular scent of him, and she found she did not want to move away from it. It frightened her, a little, how much she did not want to move. The threat arrived at dusk. It came in the shape of Hollis, the steward, crossing the lawn toward them with a folded paper in his hand and a tightness in his face. Aldous was on his feet before the man reached them, something in him shifting, hardening, the servant's posture falling away for half a second before he caught it again. Maren saw it. She filed it away. Hollis stopped a careful distance off. He glanced at her, then back to the man he still could not quite bring himself to call by a servant's name. "A word," Hollis said, "when you're able." "Now is fine." "It concerns the matter from the capital," Hollis said, choosing his words like a man stepping between stones in a river. "The older voices of the house have made their preference. Formal. They are pressing for the alliance. They want it settled before the week is out. They are saying it is no longer a request." Something went very still in Aldous' face. "They can want a great many things," he said. "They are saying," Hollis went on, lower now, "that the heir's choice has never truly been his to make. That the union was decided long ago, in rooms he was too young to sit in. And that any distraction this season will be remembered and dealt with." The word distraction hung in the gold air. Maren understood, with a cold drop in her stomach, that she was the distraction. He sent Hollis away with a quiet word, but the lavender afternoon was over. She could feel it close like a door. "Go," she said softly. "Whatever that was, it needs you." He looked at her, and for one unguarded moment the gray eyes held something raw, something that was almost an apology for a thing he had not yet told her. "Maren." "Go," she said again. Gentler. He went. She sat alone on the stone as the dark came down over the wild garden. The lavender turned from purple to gray to nothing. She turned the button over in her fingers, and she thought about the way he had stood up, the way the servant had fallen off him for half a heartbeat, like a coat slipping from a shoulder. She thought about the steward's careful face, the word distraction, the talk of rooms where a man's life was decided before he was old enough to object. She did not have the whole shape of it yet, but she was a woman who had learned to read the edges of rooms, and every edge of this one was telling her the same thing, that Reeve was not who he said he was, that something large and powerful was moving in the dark beyond this garden, and that whatever it was, it had already, quietly, begun to count her as a thing to be dealt with. The button went cold in her hand. Somewhere in the great dark house behind her, a single light came on in a high window, and stayed burning long into the night. She did not sleep much that night. She lay in the narrow guest bed at the cold end of the house, and she turned the steward's words over and over. The way she turned the button, distraction. The way the servant had stood up out on the lawn, the coat of him slipping for half a heartbeat. By morning she had decided something. She was going to ask him, plainly. And she was going to watch his hands when he answered, because hands, her grandmother had taught her, did not know how to lie the way mouths did. He came to the wild garden before she did. That was the first surprise. Aldous was already there when she arrived, sitting on their gray stone in the low morning light. And he was not pretending to be a man with somewhere else to be. He was not holding a cloth or a pitcher or any of the small props of his disguise. He had not slept either. She could see it in the shadow under his eyes. There was something different in him this morning. Some decision made in the dark hours and carried out into the daylight at great cost. "You came early," she said. "I needed to be the one who said it." He looked up at her, and his voice was low. "Before anyone else made it ugly." The button went still in her pocket. "Said what?" He stood. And the strange thing was that he did not stand like a servant. She had seen it for half a heartbeat yesterday on the lawn when the steward came. Now she saw it fully, with nothing held back. The way the morning seemed to arrange itself around him. The way the quiet authority he had been so carefully folding away all week unfolded, like a thing too large to keep hidden any longer. "My name is not Reeve," he said. The lavender was very loud in the silence. "I know," she said softly. "I've known something was wrong for 2 days. Say it. Whatever it is. Say it plainly." He met her eyes. "I am the heir of this house." The world went very still. Not loud, not violent. Just still. The way the air goes still in the half second before something falls, and you already know it is going to break. Marin did not move. The button stopped in her fingers. Her breath stopped somewhere high in her chest. "The air," she repeated. The word felt strange and heavy in her mouth. "The one behind the screen. The one all of this is for. The one every woman in that parlor has been performing herself sick for every single night. Yes, the screen is empty. Yes, and you have been... What?" Her voice was very even now, which was somehow worse than if it had shaken. "Carrying wine, shelving books, refilling cups for women who looked straight through you, watching us, all of us, like creatures in a glass case." "Yes," he said, "that is what I was doing." He did not soften it. He did not dress it up. And some cold, fair part of her noticed that, and filed it away. She turned away from him. She walked 3 steps into the lavender, her back to him, her arms crossed tight over her chest as if she were holding something and that might otherwise spill out onto the gravel. And the whole week reorganized itself behind her eyes. The carriage yard, the hand at her elbow. Careful. The library. The first morning. Same time tomorrow. The figs. You had 2 at supper. Both nights. I noticed. The corridor. You missed a piece. Left side. The stone. Yesterday afternoon. Will you tell me about that? And she had. God help her. She had. She had handed him her grandmother, her dead grandmother, and the cedar chest, and the worn place on the stair. and the last soft words of the only person who had ever truly looked at her. She had laid all of it open in the palm of a man who had been quietly lying to her with every careful breath. The shame of it rose up hot in her throat. Not the shame of having been fooled. The other kind, the worst kind, the shame of having been so starved for 1 ounce of real attention that she had spilled her whole soul at the feet of the first man who pretended to want it. He watched her back, the rigid set of her shoulders, the way her hand had come up to grip her own arm. And he understood, far too late, the true size of what he had done. He had thought of the disguise as a clever thing, a way to see people as they really were, instead of as they performed themselves to be. He had not let himself think until this exact moment about the other side of it, that the people on the far side of the disguise were being seen without their knowing, that every honest thing they gave him had been given to a man who did not exist, and she had given him more honest things than anyone he had ever known. She had given them all to Reeve. Reeve, who was no one. Reeve, who was a coat he could take off. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't." Her voice cut back across the lavender, sharp as a snapped stem. She still did not turn around. "Don't you dare do that yet. I am not finished being angry. And if you apologize now, I'll have to be gracious about it. And I don't want to be gracious. I have spent my whole life being gracious about things that hurt me. I have earned the right to just be angry for 1 minute before I have to start managing your feelings about it." He went quiet. It was, he thought, the most respectful thing he could possibly do, to stand there and simply let her be angry, to not reach for her forgiveness as though it were a thing he was owed, a debt that could be called in. So he waited. The lavender moved in the wind. A bird crossed overhead and was gone. The great dark house watched them both from its high cold windows. When she finally turned back, her eyes were bright and wet at the edges, but her face was steady. She had folded the worst of it away somewhere private, and what she said was not what he expected. "Do you want to know what the cruelest part is? Tell me. It isn't the lie." She took a slow breath. "Lies I understand. I grew up in a house made of them. I can survive a lie. No. The cruelest part is that for 1 week, for the first time in my entire life, someone noticed me." Her voice wavered, and she pulled it back under control with visible effort. "Someone noticed which chair I sat in, and what fruit I reached for, and how I held a button in my fingers when the room got to be too much. And I let myself feel it. After 22 years of being the spare daughter, the extra name, the ballast, I let myself be seen. Just once." A pause. "And now I have to learn that it was a man in a costume, collecting. I noticed things, you said, for him, as though I were one more interesting specimen to be noticed and written down. That is not what it was." His voice was rough. "Then what was it?" He took a step toward her. Just one. He did not crowd her. "It started as that," he said. He would not lie to her again, not even the small, comfortable kind of lie. "The first morning, the carriage yard. You were a candidate, and I was watching the candidates, and you nearly fell, and I caught you. That was the job. I won't pretend otherwise. And then you spoke to me in the library." He shook his head slowly. Do you understand how rare that is? Where I come from, people speak to what I have, my name, my house, what I can give them. No one speaks to the man inside the name. You did. You asked where I came from. You worried I was lonely. You sat on a stone and told me about a button your grandmother died holding. He took another step. By the third day, I was no longer watching a candidate. I was finding reasons to be in that library before you woke. Being near you was the first thing in 8 years that did not feel like a transaction. Marin's breath had gone unsteady. She wanted to stay angry. Anger was safe. Anger was armor, and she had spent a lifetime learning the exact weight of it. But he was looking at her with those gray eyes, and there was no performance anywhere in his face. She knew the difference now. She had watched a whole houseful of performances all week. This was not one. "You should have told me," she whispered. "I know. The moment I stopped being a specimen and became whatever I became to you. That was the moment. I know that too." His jaw worked. "I was afraid. The moment you knew, I thought the woman who spoke to a servant like he was a person would start speaking to the air the way everyone else does, carefully, with her eye on what I could give her, and I would lose the one true thing I'd found in years. So I was a coward. I kept the costume on." It was such an honest fear, laid so bare, that it disarmed her completely. She stood there in the lavender, the wind pulling at the thin, worn fabric of her dress, and she felt the anger begin to loosen its grip. Not because the wrong had been undone, but because she finally understood the true shape of it. He had not lied to use her. He had lied because he was a drowning man, and she had been the first clean air he'd found in years, and he had been terrified down to his bones of losing it. It did not make the lie right, but it made it human, and human she could work with. "Here is what is true," she said, and now her voice was steady again, low, and it had iron running through the middle of it. She stepped toward him, close now, closer than she had let herself come even on the stone 2 nights ago. Close enough to smell the wood smoke that always clung to him, and beneath it the warm, particular scent that was only him, the scent she had leaned toward in the dark and been frightened by. "I know my worth," she said. "It took me 22 years to learn it. It took a grandmother and a cold house full of people who never once wanted me, and a button I've carried in my pocket since I was 9. But I know it now. I am not a fortune. I am not a name. I am not a thing to be packaged up and chosen from a row of better packaged things by a man behind a screen." "Marin, let me finish." She lifted her chin. The morning light was on her face, and she did not flinch from it. "I will not perform for you. Not ever. I won't perform humility, and I won't perform forgiveness, and I will not pretend the lie didn't cut me just to make the next part easier on you. If there is something real here, and I think, God help us both, that there might be, then it has to be said, plainly, out loud, to my face, every part of it. No more screens, no more costumes, no more noticing me in secret like I'm something you're studying." She was breathing hard now. "Can you do that? Can you actually do that? You who comes from rooms where no one ever says a true thing?" He had spent his whole life in those rooms, rooms where every word was wrapped in 3 other words, where honesty was a weakness to be hidden, and the appearance of honesty was a weapon to be deployed. where a man learned very young that the true thing said out loud was the thing that got used against you later. And here was a woman in a threadbare dress with no name and no fortune and absolutely nothing to gain by it, demanding that he do the one thing his entire world had trained him never to do: say the true thing out loud to her face and let it stand there, undefended, in the open air. He felt the rarity of the moment press against his sternum like a flat, warm hand. Plainly, he said. He took a breath, and he gave it to her. I have been the heir of this house for 8 years. In that time, I have been lied to, flattered, performed for, and maneuvered by every kind of person who ever wanted something from me. I had begun to believe there was simply no other way for a person to be. His voice dropped, but it did not waver. And then I spent 5 days watching you when you did not know it mattered. Watching you choose silence when you had every right to scream. Watching you kneel on a cold floor and hand a frightened girl her dignity back when it cost you something and gained you nothing, and not one soul who could reward you was meant to be looking. He looked at her like she was the only true thing left standing in a world full of beautiful lies. I have been more certain of your character in 5 days than I have been of anyone's in my entire life. You have no fortune. There are powerful people who will fight this. There are complications I won't insult you by pretending away. But none of it changes the one thing I am telling you now, plainly, with no screen left between us. A pause. The lavender held its breath. It's you. It was you by the second morning. And it is going to go on being you, whatever it costs me. The garden was utterly silent. She looked at him for a long, long moment. And then she did something he did not expect at all. She reached up, slowly, and she pressed her open palm flat against the center of his chest, not to push him away, not to pull him in, just to feel it. The steady, hard, living knock of his heart under her hand. Your heart is going like a drum, she whispered. Yes, mine too. Her hand stayed where it was. Here, feel. And she took his hand, those large, careful, unhurried hands she had noticed on the very first day in the carriage yard, and she pressed it flat over her own heart, over the worn fabric of her second best dress, over the very pocket where the brass button lay. He could feel it. The frantic, living rhythm of her racing under his palm, and he could feel, beneath his fingers through the thin cloth, the small, hard shape of the button itself. His grandmother's words, in her grandmother's voice, hung in the air between them, unspoken and enormous. When you find the one whose hands are honest, give it back to him. They stood like that for a long moment, 2 hands, 2 hearts, the lavender moving in slow waves around them. The whole great house, with all its screens and its lies and its powerful older voices, very far away for this one suspended breath. He wanted to close the distance. She could see it plainly in his face now, the wanting of it, undisguised at last. And she wanted it too. She would not lie to herself about that. Not anymore. Standing this close, with his honest hand spread over her racing heart, and the warm smell of him filling her whole chest, she wanted it more than she had let herself want anything in years. But she did not close it. And, to his everlasting credit, neither did he. Not yet, she said softly. His hand stilled over her heart, but he did not pull it away. There are things in the way, she went on. Big things. I'm not a fool. I heard the steward yesterday, on the lawn. I heard the word distraction. I heard alliance. I am not going to melt into your arms in a field of lavender and pretend the rest of the world isn't standing right outside this garden wall, sharpening its knives, waiting to tell me exactly how little I'm allowed to have. You're allowed, he said roughly. I decide who is allowed in this house. No, she shook her head, and there was something almost tender in it now, beneath the iron. That is exactly the thing, Aldous. Don't you see it? You shouldn't have to decide it for me by force. If this only survives because you outrank every voice that objects to me, then it isn't love at all. It's just power. Moving a poor girl into a chair she was told she couldn't sit in. And I have spent my whole life being moved around by other people's power. I will not trade one set of hands for another, even kind ones. She took his hand from her heart, gently, and she held it for a moment, cradled in both of hers. I don't want to be moved, she said. I want to be chosen, in the open, by a man who could just as easily have walked away from all this trouble and chose, in front of everyone, not to. He looked down at their joined hands, and slowly, something that was not disappointment moved across his face, something far closer to awe, because she was right. She was completely, devastatingly right. She had seen the thing he himself had not allowed himself to see. That a love which only survived because he held the power to crush every objection to it was not a love at all. It was just one more arrangement, dressed up in prettier clothes. She did not want to be arranged. She wanted to be earned, out loud, where everyone could see the cost of it. Then I'll earn it, he said quietly, in the open, whatever it takes, however long it takes. Good. A small breath escaped her that was almost, not quite, a laugh. Then you had better come to the library tomorrow, the usual hour. We have a great deal to discuss, you and I, and most of it is going to be very difficult, and none of it can be solved in a single morning. I'll be there. She let go of his hand. She stepped back, and she tucked the small, hard shape of the button safely away again, deep in her pocket, where it would wait until the right morning finally came, if it ever came at all. And Aldous, she said. It was the first time she had used his real name. It came out careful in her mouth, like something newly unwrapped and not yet familiar. Your hands, she said. What about them? She looked down at them, then back up at him. They're honest. I've been watching them all week, the way my grandmother taught me to. The ghost of a smile touched her mouth. That was never the part of you I doubted. And she turned and walked back toward the great cold house through the moving lavender, leaving him standing alone on the gray stone, with his heart still pounding in the exact place her hand had been, and the sudden, certain knowledge that he would tear down every screen in his world and answer every powerful voice in it before he let that woman walk out of his life. The revelation came at supper on the 6th evening. It came the formal way. The heir of the house appeared in the dining room, not in plain gray, but in the dark, well-made clothes of his station, with the old sigil of his family at his collar. And the room underwent a sudden, silent shift. Every person at that long table recalibrated all at once, Everything they had said and done and failed to do in the preceding 6 days. Marin watched it happen from her quiet end of the table. She watched Sabra's beautiful face perform a small, perfect miracle of recovery. The flicker of horror there and then gone. The swift, smooth rearrangement into warmth. Sabra was nothing if not adaptable. But there was a moment. Just one. When Sabra looked down the table at Marin, and her eyes had sharp edges in them. The edges of a woman who has just understood, far too late, that the spare daughter she had been mocking all week was the one the servant in gray had been watching the whole time. Marin looked back at her, and her own eyes had no edges at all. That, somehow, was worse. He said little that night. He did not announce anything. He did not name her. He simply took his place at the head of the table and ate and let the room sit in its own discomfort. But once, while the others talked too brightly to fill the silence, his eyes found hers across the length of the table, and he held them there, just for a breath, just long enough. It was not a secret look anymore. That was the whole point of it. He had told her he would earn her in the open, and this was the first small payment. A look that anyone at that table could see if they cared to. Marin felt it land warm in her chest, and she felt, too, the cold thing waiting underneath it, because she had heard the word distraction in the garden, and she knew that a look like that in a room like this was not free. Someone always sent the bill. The bill came the next morning. They arrived from beyond the estate, the older voices of his house made flesh at last, 3 of them, with a 4th man at their center who carried himself like a closed ledger. The staff whispered his name through the corridors. Drummond, one of the oldest and hardest of the family's powers. They were not pleased. They were not pleased about the disguise, which they had not been told of, and would have forbidden. They were not pleased about the foolishness of letting a man choose his own future in a house full of arrangements already made. And they were spectacularly, coldly not pleased about the identity of the girl the heir had so plainly begun to favor. They gathered in the long east room. Marin was not invited. Of course she wasn't. So she did what she had always done. She went to the wild garden instead, to the gray stone, with the button in her hand. It was where she thought best, and she did not mean to listen. But the old house carried everything. She had learned that on the very first day. The walls in these old halls carry everything. The east room's tall window stood open to the morning, and the wild garden lay just beneath it. She heard all of it. Nameless, Drummond was saying. His voice was like a stone dragged over stone. The girl is nameless, no fortune. A father drowning in debts that this house would be expected to swallow. And you would set her at the head of everything we have built. Her father is irrelevant. That was Aldous, flat and even. I am not marrying her father. The alliance was settled long ago. Another voice, smoother, older. Settled in rooms you were too young to sit in. It is not a request, and it was never a request. The other house expects it. The arrangement holds the whole thing together. Pull that one thread, and a great deal more comes loose than you understand. I understand exactly how much comes loose. Then you understand what you are risking. For a girl in a borrowed dress who cannot even claim a name. Marin sat very still on the stone. The lavender moved around her. A bird crossed the open sky, and she listened to powerful men in a room she was not allowed to enter decide the worth of her life by what she did not have. No name, no fortune, a drowning father. She had heard versions of this her whole life. She had armor for it. She had spent years forging that armor by the fire of her grandmother's cold house. But then she heard the next part, and the armor did not help her at all. "There is more," Drummond said, and now his voice changed. It dropped into something almost gentle, which was worse. "You should know what is already being said. Out there, beyond these walls." A pause. The eldest stepsister has been busy. She has been telling a story about the father's debts, about how the family came to ruin. She has dressed it in the worst possible colors, and she has been generous in sharing it with anyone who will listen. The other house has heard it. By tomorrow, the whole season will have heard it. "Sabra," Aldous said. The single word was cold enough to frost the glass. "The girl herself need not have done a thing wrong," Drummond went on, relentless. "It does not matter. A name, once dirtied, stays dirtied. If you raise this girl up, you raise the story up with her. You will spend the rest of your life answering for her father's ruin. And so will she. Every door she walks through, the whisper will walk in beside her. Is that the gift you mean to give the woman you claim to favor? A lifetime of being the scandal at the head of the table? That was the part that found the gap in the armor, not the insult to herself. She could carry that. She had carried it for 22 years. It was the other thing, the picture Drummond had painted, cruel and clear. Marin at the head of a long table, year after year, and the whisper walking in beside her every single time. Aldous beside her, answering for her ruin, spending the strength of his whole house defending a choice the world would never stop making him pay for. She could survive being unwanted. She had practice. She did not think she could survive being the weight that slowly dragged him under. She heard his voice rise then, lower and more dangerous than before. She heard him fight for her. "I want to be precise about something," he said. "I went into this week looking for a person of character, because a life built well requires a partner of character, not a partner of convenience. And what I found is a woman who knelt on a cold floor for a kitchen girl she had never met, who reads and thinks, and told me, when she believed I was no one, that a name shows only what a person wants you to see." A pause. "I have worn this name for 8 years. She is the first person who looked at what was underneath it, and was not frightened, and was not strategic about what she found. I would like to keep her. The decision is mine, and it is made." In the garden, Marin closed her fingers over the button until it bit into her palm. He was magnificent, and it changed nothing, because she could hear, even through the open window, the silence that met his words, the hard, patient, immovable silence of men who had been winning these arguments since before he was born. They would not shout him down. They did not need to. They would simply wait and press and let the story do its slow work in the dark. And a year from now, or 2, or 5, the weight of it would still be there. He could win the room. He could not win the world for her by force, and even if he tried, She would have to watch him spend himself doing it, year after year, for her sake. She thought about what she had told him in the lavender. I don't want to be moved. I want to be chosen in the open by a man who could also have walked away. But she had not let herself think about the other side of that, about what it would cost him to choose her, about whether choosing her was the same as letting him drown. She sat in the garden a long time after the voices stopped. The morning warmed, the lavender bent and straightened in the wind, and slowly, terribly, a decision began to form in her. It was not a noble decision. She wanted to be clear with herself about that. There was nothing noble in it. It was made of fear and love in equal parts, and she could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. If she stayed, she would spend the rest of her life as his beautiful, ruinous mistake, and he would spend the rest of his defending her. If she left, she would go back to a cold house, and a worn stare and a button that had pointed her, for one impossible week, at a man whose hands were honest, and he would be free. The story would die without her in it. The alliance would close over the gap she left like water. He would be unhappy for a season, and then less unhappy. And then he would do the sensible thing, and the great machine of his house would grind on undisturbed. She loved him. That was exactly why she could not let herself be the thing that dragged him down. She made herself remember it was her choice. That was the cruel mercy in it. No one was forcing her out. Drummond had not banished her. Aldous would have fought to the last breath to keep her. She was choosing to go. For her own pride, which would not let her be a kept scandal. And for him, because she would rather lose him whole than keep him slowly bleeding. Both things were true at once. She had stopped being able to separate them. She went back to the cold end of the house. She did not weep. She was past weeping. She moved with the same calm efficiency she had used on the broken crockery, because a thing that needed doing did not become easier by trembling over it. She gathered her few belongings, the threadbare dresses, the one good comb, the small borrowed book she had never returned, and now never would. She folded it all into the same trunk she had arrived in, and she sat for a moment on the edge of the narrow bed, with the button warming in her closed hand, and she let herself feel the whole shape of what she was about to give up. The library at the usual hour, the figs, the honest hands, the first man who had ever noticed which chair she chose. She had told him not yet. She had not understood, when she said it, that not yet and never were sometimes the same word, wearing different clothes. There was one thing left to do. She would not simply vanish. That was beneath them both. She owed him a true goodbye, said plainly, the way she had demanded everything be said, but not to his face. She knew herself too well. If she stood in front of those gray eyes and tried to say it, he would talk her out of it in a single breath, and she would let him, because she wanted to be talked out of it more than she had ever wanted anything. So she would write it. She found paper. She sat by the high window in the gray afternoon light, and she began, slowly, to put it down, that she knew her worth, that this was not her thinking herself too small for him, that it was the opposite, that she knew exactly what she was and exactly what she was not, and that she would not let what she was not become the chain around his ankle for the rest of his life. that his hands were honest, that she had never once doubted it, that she was giving the button back to no one, that she would carry it home and keep it, and that it had done its work even so, because for 1 week it had pointed her at a true thing, and now she knew true things existed, and that knowing would have to be enough. She did not hear the kitchen door open below. She did not see the small figure slip out across the yard and run fast toward the east wing. Tamsin, the kitchen girl, who had seen the trunk being carried down, who had heard the staff whisper that the quiet kind one was leaving in the morning, before light, before anyone could stop her. Tamsin, who owed Marin a debt she did not know how to name, and who had decided, with the fierce clarity of the young, that there was exactly one person in this whole cold house who needed to know. Marin sealed the letter. She set it on the pillow, where it would be found after she was gone. Outside the window, the light was beginning its long slide toward evening. By the first gray of tomorrow, she would be in a carriage on the long road, going back the way she came. She held the button to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered to her grandmother, to the empty room, to no one. It was true. For a little while, it was true. That has to be enough. She did not yet know that a 16-year-old girl was, at that very moment, hammering both small fists against a door at the other end of the house, or that the man behind that door would be on his feet before the second knock. The knock came twice. By the second one, Aldous was already at the door. Tamsin stood in the corridor with her cap crooked and her thin chest heaving, as though she had run the whole length of the house without once stopping for breath. And her small face was set with a fierce, frightened determination that did not belong to a girl her age. "She's leaving," Tamsin said. "The kind one, Marin, before light. They carried her trunk down already. I saw them do it." For 1 whole second, the air of the great house did not move, and then something in his face broke open, and he ran. But here's the thing. He did not reach her in time to stop her, and that, in the end, was the mercy of the whole night, because what was about to happen could not be his rescue. It had to be her choice. If he had caught her at the carriage step and talked her out of it, it would have been one more powerful man deciding the shape of her life. She had spent 22 years being decided for. This time, she was going to decide. Marin had not been able to sleep beside that sealed letter. She had lain in the narrow bed at the cold end of the house, the button shut tight in her fist, and the folded letter glowing pale on the pillow beside her like a small white accusation. And the longer she lay there, the wronger it felt. Not the leaving. She still half believed in the leaving. The leaving had a terrible logic she could not entirely argue down. It was the letter. A letter was a screen. A letter was a costume. A letter was the coward's way of saying a true thing, and she had stood in a field of lavender not 2 days past, and demanded that everything between them be said plainly, out loud, to the face. And here she was, about to break her own one rule, about to slip away in the gray dark and let a folded paper do her speaking for her. She had spent her whole life being spoken for, by her father, who spoke of her only as a debt to be moved, by her sisters, who spoke around her as though she were furniture, by powerful men in rooms she was never once allowed to enter. She would not now let a letter speak for her too. So she sat up in the dark, and all at once, with the cold clarity that sometimes comes in the last hour before dawn, she understood the thing she had gotten wrong. She had been about to leave in order to protect him, to spare him the weight of her, to choose, quietly and beautifully, the noble disappearance, and to call it love. But that was just one more way of letting other people set her price. Drummond had stood in that East Room and called her a scandal, and she had believed him enough to pack a trunk. She had let a man she had never been introduced to, in a room she was barred from entering, write the ending of her own story, and she had nearly signed it. No, if she was going to lose this, and she still might, she was not fool enough to think the danger was past. Then she would lose it standing up, in the open, in the full light of morning, with her own voice, saying her own name, not slinking off in the dark to make it easier for everyone who had already decided she was nothing. She had told Aldous she wanted to be chosen out loud. Well then, she owed him the same courage, and she owed it, most of all, to herself. She took the letter off the pillow, and slowly, deliberately, she tore it into halves, then into quarters. She let the pale pieces fall to the floor like the last of a thing she was finished being. She dressed in her second-best dress, the one with the pocket mended 4 times over, and she set the button where it had always belonged against her hip, warm and plain and certain. And as the first gray light came up over the moor, Maren Ellison walked toward the East Room, where she knew the powerful men would already be gathered. Because powerful men rose early. They rose early to decide other people's lives before those people were awake to object. She did not go to be saved. She went to speak. They were all there when she opened the door. Drummond, at the center, like a closed ledger. The 3 older voices arranged around him. Hollis the steward, grave against the far wall. And Aldous, who had just come tearing from the cold end of the house, who had found the bed empty and the torn letter scattered across the floor and his own heart climbing into his throat, and who turned when the door opened and saw her standing there, alive, present, unleaving. The look on his face nearly undid her where she stood. But she did not go to him. She had not come for him. She stepped into the very center of that room full of men who had already weighed her and found her worthless. And she let them look. The borrowed dress, the mended pocket, the girl with no name and no fortune, and nothing at all to recommend her except the one thing none of them had bothered to measure. "I heard you," she said. Her voice was steady and clear, and it carried to every corner of the room. "Yesterday, in this room, the window was open, and these old walls carry everything, and I heard every single word of it. So let me spare you the trouble of saying it all again behind my back." Drummond's face went hard as flint. "This is not a matter for... It is entirely a matter for me." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "You spent the better part of an hour deciding the worth of my life. I think I have earned the right to stand in the room while you do it. Don't you?" Silence answered her. She let it stretch. She had learned long ago, at the cold edges of cold rooms, exactly how to let a silence do its work. "You said I have no name," she went on. "That's true. I don't. You said I have no fortune. Also true. My father is drowning in debts, and you are right that this house would be expected to take them on, and I am not going to stand here and pretend any of that away. I grew up among people who say true things to wound. I made my peace with the true things a long time ago." She drew a breath. "But you said one thing that had nothing to do with money or names. You said I am a scandal, that my sister has dressed our family's ruin in the ugliest colors she could find and sent it walking out into the world, and that for the rest of my life, every door I ever try to pass through, that whisper would walk in beside me. You called me," what was the phrase? "The scandal at the head of the table for the rest of his life and mine." Her eyes moved just once to Aldous and then back to the old man. "And do you know, for one whole night, I believed you." The room was very still now. Even Aldous did not move. He had started toward her the instant she came through the door, and then he had stopped himself because he understood, with that quick, wordless reading the two of them shared, that this was not his moment to take, that if he stepped in front of her now, to shield her, to fight for her, he would be doing the cruelest thing he could possibly do. He would be telling the whole room and her that she could not stand in it alone. So he let her stand alone. And it was the hardest thing he had ever made himself do, and the most loving. "I packed a trunk last night," Marin said. "I was going to leave before the light came. I was going to spare this man the weight of me, and I told myself that it was noble. I told myself I was protecting him." She shook her head slowly. "But that was a lie, too. A prettier one than the rest, but a lie all the same. Because the truth is that I was letting you win. I was letting a man I have never once been introduced to, in a room I was never invited into, decide that I am too small for the life I want to live. People have been deciding that for me since I was 9 years old. And I was about to do it one more time, with my own 2 hands, and call it love." Her voice did not break. If anything, it grew steadier. "I am finished doing that. I am finished today, in this room, in front of all of you." She turned slowly and addressed the whole of it. The older voices, the grave steward, the man she loved and would not look at yet. "Here is what is true," she said. "A name shows only what a person wants you to see. My grandmother taught me that, and she was wiser than anyone who has ever stood in this room. A name is only the thing you hang on the outside. It tells you nothing about what a person does when they believe no one important is watching." She looked directly at Drummond. "You have a great name. And in the space of 1 hour, yesterday, you used it to decide that a frightened girl's entire future should be thrown on the fire to keep an old arrangement convenient. That is what your great name does, sir, when it thinks no one is watching. A beat. I was watching, and I was not impressed." Drummond's jaw worked. He said nothing. She turned again. "My sister has a name as well," she said. "Sabra. And she has spent this whole week telling a story about our family's ruin, in the very ugliest colors she could find, to anyone who would lean in close enough to hear it. Because she would rather watch this entire house burn to the ground than watch the spare daughter walk out of it carrying something good." She lifted her chin. "That is what her name does, when it thinks no one is watching. I have lived right beside it my whole life. I know its colors better than any of you ever will. She let the room hold that. But here is the one question not a single one of you thought to ask. The story she has been selling, door to door. Is it even true? A long pause. My father's debts are real. I have already said so, and I won't unsay it. But the ruin she's painting, the shame she's peddling like fruit at a market, that part is her invention. She dressed it up to wound, because wounding is the only language the woman has ever been fluent in. A beat. The debts are a misfortune. She has dressed a misfortune up as a disgrace and sold the costume as the truth. There is a world of difference between the two, and not one of you stopped to measure it. You simply believed her because she had the better dress and the louder voice and the name that opened the door before she'd even knocked. Her gaze swept them. None of you thought to ask the nameless girl in the corner whether the story was even real. And that, gentlemen, is the whole rotten heart of the thing. You trust the name instead of looking at the person. And the looking is the only part that has ever once told you the truth. Now at last, she turned to Aldous, and her voice changed. It did not weaken, but it softened, the way iron softens just enough to be shaped. You told me in the garden that you would earn me in the open, so I am going to make it easier for you than you deserve. I am going to do something no one in my entire life has ever let me do. A breath. I am going to choose myself first, out loud, so that you are allowed to choose me second. She looked around the room one final time, slowly, meeting each pair of eyes that would meet hers. I am Marin Ellison. I have no fortune and no name worth the saying. I kneel on cold floors for kitchen girls because someone has to, and no one else ever does. I notice the people the rest of you walk straight past. I know my own worth, down to the bone, and it is not for sale. And it is not for any man in this room to set. Her voice rang clear. I would be honored to share this man's life. And I would walk out of this house with my head up and never once look back, before I would let a single one of you turn me into the apology at his table. So choose, but choose me out loud, where everyone can see it, or do not choose me at all, because I am done for the rest of my days being anyone's quiet mistake. The room was utterly, ringingly silent. And then Aldous crossed it. He did not hurry. He walked through the center of that room, past Drummond, past the older voices, past every arrangement that had ever been made over his head, and he stopped in front of her, and he took both of her hands in his honest ones, in full and open view of every powerful man in the house. Out loud then, he said, since you've shown me how. He turned to face the room, but he did not let go of her hands. Not for an instant. The alliance is finished. It was an arrangement made over the head of a child too young to be in the room, and that child is a grown man now, and his answer is no. I have read the old agreements through 4 times over. They recommend. They do not require. There is no law in this house that forbids a man from choosing with his eyes open. If any of you wishes to test that, you are welcome to try. You will lose. He looked hard at Drummond, and the story being carried out into the world about her family. It stops today. The first door it tries to walk through, it will find me standing in it. Sabra Ellison is free to leave this house at her very earliest convenience. She may take her better dress, and her louder voice, and her ugly colors with her." His voice dropped low, and somehow, the lower it went, the further it carried. "I have worn this name for 8 years. It has bought me a great deal of flattery, a great deal of obedience, the constant company of people who wanted things from the man wearing it. It never once bought me a single person who looked at what was underneath the name and was not frightened and was not strategic about what she found there." He looked at her then, only at her. "This is that person. The decision was made days ago in a library on the second morning by a woman who did not know who I was and spoke to me anyway, like I was worth speaking to." Drummond rose from his chair. For a long moment the old man stood and looked at the two of them, at the joined hands, at the heir who would not be moved, at the girl in the 4 times mended dress, who had walked alone into the very center of his certainty, and refused utterly to bow to it. And whatever it was that he saw there, he understood at long last that this was not a thing he could win by waiting, that some doors, once a person has walked through them on their own 2 feet, cannot be closed again from the outside. "The house will remember this," Drummond said. His voice was cold as the stone of the place. "I should hope so," Marin answered quite evenly. "I'd hate to have to say all of it twice." A muscle moved in the old man's cheek. In a younger, warmer man, it might have become the beginning of a smile. It did not become one now, but he inclined his head, the smallest fraction of an inch, and he gathered the older voices with a single glance, and they followed him out, and the heavy door closed behind them. The storm, for now, had passed over. They stood alone in the long east room. The gray morning light came slanting through the open window, the same window that had carried every cruel word down to her in the wild garden the day before. It carried nothing now but the smell of lavender and wet stone, and the first thin gold of the rising sun. Marin's hands were still folded in his, and she found, now that it was over, that she was shaking, just slightly, the way a person shakes after they have set down something they carried too far. "You tore up the letter," he said quietly. "You read it?" "Only the pieces, on the floor of your room." His thumb moved, slow, across her knuckles. "I couldn't put it back together fast enough to read the words, but I could see the shape of it. You were going to go. I was." She would not lie to him. She had decided days ago that she never would. "And then I lay there in the dark and understood that leaving was just one more way of letting them write my ending for me. If I was going to lose you, I wanted to lose you in the light, with my own voice, not from behind a folded piece of paper in the dark." "You didn't lose me," he said. "No." A breath escaped her, half a laugh and half something far wetter. "It appears that I didn't." She looked down at their joined hands, his honest hands, the ones she had noticed in a crowded carriage yard before she knew a single thing about him. The hands that had caught her falling elbow and set down a small dish of figs and carried wine all week for women who looked straight through him as though he were made of air. The hands she had, without knowing it, been waiting for since she was 9 years old. She did not give him the button. Not yet. And there was something exactly right in that, and they both felt the rightness of it without a word. The button was not for a battlefield. It was for the still, ordinary, unremarkable morning that comes after the noise has finally gone quiet. She would know that morning when it came. "Tamsin found you," she said softly. "Didn't she? That's how you knew." She hammered on my door like the whole house was burning down around her. Something gentle eased across his tired face. A frightened kitchen girl ran the entire length of this house in the dark to save the woman who once knelt on a cold floor for her. You should know that, Marin. You should know exactly what that floor bought you in the end. Her throat went tight. She thought of the broken crockery, the white-faced child, the thing that had simply needed doing, that no one of consequence had been meant to see. It doesn't become less broken because important people are watching, she had told him on the stone. It doesn't become more broken because they're not. She had meant it that day about the crockery. She had not understood then that she was also describing herself. A thing the world had decided was broken, worth picking up anyway, worth mending, worth kneeling down for. "I'll thank her," Marin said, "properly, for the rest of my life, if she'll let me." Outside the tall window, the moor was turning slowly from gray to gold. The week of consideration was over. The screens were all down now, the costumes folded away, the powerful voices gone home to sit with their cold certainties and discover, one slow morning at a time, that the world had moved without their leave. And in the long East Room, two people who had spent their whole lives reading rooms from the safe edges of them stood together, finally, in the very center of one. Not because he had power enough to put her there, but because she had walked in, entirely alone, in a 4 times mended dress, and claimed the floor with her own voice. He had only needed to do one thing: choose her, out loud, the moment she had finished choosing herself. Sometime later, the saying found a new home. It was carved into stone at the base of a fountain in the courtyard, the one place in the whole great house where ordinary people came and went freely, where anyone with a worry or a need could walk in and be heard. A name shows only what a person wants you to see. Their hands show what they are. The mason had raised an eyebrow when Marin handed him the words. She had only smiled and told him it was an old saying. He had carved it anyway, deep and clean, where the light would catch it every morning. She had chosen the place on purpose, so that the first thing a frightened, nameless person saw when they came to that house for help was a promise that here, at least, they would be looked at, not measured, not weighed by what they carried. Looked at. The morning the courtyard opened, Marin stood beside the fountain in the gold light, and she let herself feel the strangeness of it, that she was here at all, that the spare daughter, the ballast, the girl who had nearly slipped away in the dark, was now the one whose name opened doors instead of closing them. It still ambushed her, sometimes. The size of the change. She had not become someone else. That was the part she held on to. She was still the woman who read 3 books at once and lost all of them. Still the one who noticed which chair was loneliest in a crowded room and went to sit in it. She had only, finally, been led into the light. But the change she took the deepest, quietest pleasure in was not her own. It was Tamsin. The kitchen girl who had run the length of a dark house to save her had been brought up out of the scullery, on Marin's particular recommendation, into a place where her fierce, clear-eyed cleverness could grow. And grow it did. Tamsin had opinions now, strong ones, about the proper arrangement of the stores and the right way to receive a difficult guest, and 100 other things she delivered to the head of the household staff with a confidence that made that formidable woman's mouth twitch toward a smile she would never admit to. The girl who had once frozen, white-faced, over a tray of broken crockery, no longer froze at anything. Someone had knelt on a cold floor for her once, when it cost something, and bought nothing. And it turned out that a single act like that, done at the right moment, for the right frightened child, could change the whole shape of a life. The kneeling had cost Marin nothing she could name, and it had bought, without her ever knowing, the very thing that came running through the dark to save her. The smallest doors, it seemed, opened onto the largest rooms. The old powers had made the trouble they promised. It had been managed, slowly, without cruelty, but without retreat. Drummond had withdrawn to his own quiet corner of the world in a move the house called voluntary, and everyone understood was not. The arrangement with the other house had quietly dissolved. There had been noise about it for a season, and then the noise had done what noise does. It grew bored of itself, and moved on, and found some newer thing to be loud about. Character, Aldous had said once, has a longer life than scandal. He had been right. And the story Sabra had carried out into the world died the way such stories die, not in a single dramatic moment, just quietly, from lack of feeding, because once the air stood plainly behind the nameless girl, the ugly colors of the tale began to look exactly like what they were. The work of a jealous sister, and nothing more. Sabra had left the house, as she'd been invited to, but at the turn of the season, a letter came, careful, folded, in Sabra's own sharp hand. It was an apology. It was, Marin judged when she read it, about 60 parts genuine and 40 parts strategic. Sabra had always been a woman who counted the cost of things. Even her remorse came with arithmetic in it. But 60 parts was more than Marin had expected, and more, perhaps, than Sabra had known she was capable of. Marin read the letter twice, and then she did the only sensible thing a person can do with an apology that is most of the way true. She accepted it, not because the wound had vanished. Some wounds do not vanish. They only stop bleeding and become a thing you carry, and eventually a thing you barely notice carrying. She accepted it because holding the grudge would have cost her more than the grudge was worth. She wrote back, briefly, kindly. Without warmth she did not feel, and without coldness she had decided not to keep. And then she moved on, which was, she had learned, the only real freedom there is. Not pretending the hurt away, just refusing to let it choose your direction for you. There was the matter of the broken plate. On the last morning of that long week, before any of this, Tamsin had pressed something into Marin's hands, wrapped in a folded cloth. Inside were the salvaged fragments of one of the dishes she had shattered in the corridor, reassembled, the cracks filled and sealed with thin lines of gold. My grandmother showed me the mending, Tamsin had said, shy and fierce all at once. She said you weren't supposed to see a broken thing and look away from it. You were supposed to mend it so the breaking showed, so everyone could see it had been broken and loved anyway. Marin had held the small repaired thing in her palm. Imperfect, bright gold in every fracture. And she had felt the back of her throat go tight, the way it did now, remembering it. That mended plate sat now on a shelf near the petition corridor, in plain view, where every person who came to the house for help would pass it. Marin had placed it there herself. She had thought, when she set it down, about all the times in her life she had been the broken thing on the floor, the spare daughter, the extra name, the girl people stepped around on their way to someone who mattered. No one had mended her with gold. For most of her life, no one had even knelt. And so she had decided, the day she set that plate upon its shelf, that for as long as this house was hers to shape, no broken person would be stepped around in it. No frightened girl with a shattered tray would freeze alone in a corridor while 7 important families decided not to notice. That was the work she had chosen. Not the fountains and not the courtyards, though those were good. The real work was simpler than that. It was the work of being the person who kneels. One evening, well into the new life, Marin found Aldous at the edge of a crowded room. It was where he always stood. She had noticed it long ago, in the very first days, before she knew his name. The same instinct she carried, the pull toward the safe edge of things. She came and stood beside him. That too had become a habit. The two of them, at the rim of the noise, reading the room together. 2 people who had spent their whole lives watching from the corners, who had finally found someone to watch beside. He had something small in his hand. He was turning it over, slow, the way a person does in idle moments. The button. She had given it to him, in the end. Not on the battlefield of the East Room. She had been right to wait. The button was never meant for the noise. She had given it to him on a quiet, unremarkable morning, weeks after the powerful voices had gone home. In the library, at their usual hour, with 2 cups of tea between them and the gray light coming soft through the tall windows, and nothing at all happening in the world except everything. She had set it on the table between them, plain brass, dull, unhurried. My grandmother said I'd know when to give it back, she had told him, and I do. It's now. It was always going to be now. He had picked it up and turned it over in his honest fingers with that particular attention of his, and the look on his face had not been triumph. It had been the look of a man arriving, at last, somewhere he had not known he was traveling toward. "Pocket ritual?" she asked him now, watching him turn the button at the edge of the crowded room. "Reminder," he said. He held it up between them. That small, plain, unremarkable piece of brass. A reminder that the things worth seeing are almost always unremarkable. If you stop looking for the name and start looking at the hands. She leaned her shoulder lightly against his arm. Across the room, on its shelf near the petition corridor, she could see the gold-mended plate catching the candlelight. Small, imperfect, bright exactly where it had once been broken. "Tamsin asked me the other day why I keep that old thing on display," Marin said. "Out where everyone can see it. A cracked plate, in a house full of beautiful, unbroken ones." "And what did you tell her?" "I told her it's proof." Marin's voice was soft. Proof that the broken places can be the most beautiful part of a thing, if someone bothers to mend them honestly, if someone refuses to look away. A pause. A small smile tugged at her mouth. And do you know what she said back to me? Tell me. She said, "That's an awful lot of meaning for a cup shard, ma'am." Marin laughed under her breath. And then she went and put better flowers in the vase beside it, so the plate would have something pretty to sit next to. He laughed, his real laugh, the one that was nothing at all like the practiced sound a powerful man makes in a crowded room. The one that was, instead, exactly like the quiet servant she had first met on a ladder in a library, shelving books with his honest hands. She loved that laugh precisely for that reason, because it was proof that the man underneath the name was still there, had always been there, had only been waiting all those years for one single person to speak to him as though he were worth speaking to. She turned to look at him, at the face she had first seen through road dust and plain gray cloth, at the hands she had watched move through an ordinary morning, doing ordinary work, performing themselves for no one at all, at the man who had come to her disguised as nothing remarkable and turned out, underneath it, to be the thing that changed the whole course of her life. His hands show what he is. She had been so young when her grandmother said it. She had thought it was a romantic story, a pretty thing an old woman tells a lonely child to make the loneliness smaller. She understood now that it had been an instruction, and a true one. She thought sometimes about the girl she had been at the start of that week, the one in the threadbare dress, folded into a carriage like a thing being shipped, sent down a long road to a place where she expected nothing, hoped for nothing, planned only to read in a corner and keep her dignity and go quietly home. She wanted sometimes to reach back through the years and find that girl, to kneel down in front of her the way she had once knelt in front of Tamsin, and to tell her the true thing she had not yet learned, that her worth had never once depended on her name, that it had never depended on a fortune she did not have, or a father who did not love her, or a row of better daughters in better dresses, that her worth had been in her hands the whole time, in the kindness she gave away freely, expecting nothing back, and that one day, against every odd the world had stacked against her, someone would come looking for exactly that, not the name, not the fortune, the hands, the person, her. The thing she had learned and held on to, and tried now to build into the very stones of the house, was this: people are not the things they lack. A nameless girl is not nothing. A frightened kitchen child is not a ruined tray. A broken plate is not refused to be swept away. Every one of them is a thing worth kneeling for, worth looking at, worth mending honestly, so the gold shows in the cracks. The world, she had found, was very quick to decide a person's value from the outside, from the name, from the dress, from the loudness of the voice, and the weight of the purse. And the world was almost always wrong, because the truth of a person was never in any of those things. It was in the quiet moments, the unrewarded ones, in whether they knelt when something needed kneeling for, and there was nothing in the world to be gained by it. The candles burned low. The crowded room thinned slowly into quiet, and the two of them stayed where they were, at the edge of it, shoulder to shoulder, the heir of a great house, and the woman with no name who had walked into his certainty and refused to bow. He took the button and he turned it over once more, and then he reached out and pressed it gently into her open palm. "Here," he said, "it suits you better tonight." She looked down at it, the small, dull, unremarkable thing her grandmother had pressed into her hand on the last morning of that good woman's life. When you find the one whose hands are honest, give it back to him. She had found him. She had given it back, and now he was giving it again, the way honest things should always move between honest hands, freely, without keeping score. She closed her fingers over the warm brass, and she understood, standing there in the last of the candlelight, that this was what her grandmother had meant all along. Not a single magic moment, not a crown, or a great name, or a story that ended at a wedding. Just this: two people who had spent their whole lives unseen, learning at last how to see each other, and choosing it, again and again, every quiet, ordinary day. Outside, beyond the tall windows, the courtyard fountain ran soft in the dark, and carved into the stone at its base, where the morning light would find it the moment the sun came up. The old saying held its ground: patient, plain, asking nothing of the powerful, and everything of the honest.